Hello friends, welcome to LeggLife. My name is Adam, and you will instantly notice something very different about this video. My lovely wife Sherri, she's actually not here with me today. Sherri's not feeling super well, and so she decided to sit this one out. And in light of that, I thought this is the perfect opportunity to film a video that I originally wanted to be a podcast. And that is talking all about the uniqueness of growing up here in Alaska. I'm going to talk a little bit about my story, what it was like to grow up here, and then I made a list in my phone, just some things that I think are unique about having called this place home as a child and growing up here. So that's what we're going to talk about today, growing up in this wonderfully weird place called Alaska. So a lot of you have asked me, Adam, hey, were you born in Alaska? Did you move there? My family actually moved to Alaska when I was 3 years old. We moved to the town of Trapper Creek, Alaska. And Trapper Creek is on the road system between Anchorage and Fairbanks. It is hour and a half, 2 hours-ish north of Anchorage. And my family owned and ran a lodge in Trapper Creek. And it was an amazing place to grow up. It was one of those unique little roadside lodges that had a bar, it had a restaurant, it had a few little motel rooms, there was lots of live music. It was just sort of a gathering place for the community. Now, Trapper Creek is not a big town. It's just a few hundred people at best. But for me growing up there, I absolutely, my memories of being a little boy in Trapper Creek really are great. Because I just remember that the land, like this place, Alaska, was as big as my little kid imagination. As much as I could imagine and dream, somehow the land was just as big or even bigger. And so I just remember being outside and walking through woods or walking through the field we had by our house, and it just all seeming so magical. Like our closest neighbor, I think, was like a mile away, and it just was the coolest. As you can imagine, I was raised around some, we'll call them unique characters in the restaurant bar lodge my family ran there in small town Alaska. It was just the coolest upbringing. And then my parents split up when I was about 7, so shortly after that, we moved to Anchorage, and Anchorage is where I have lived and called home ever since. It's where I went through most of elementary school. It's where I went through junior high and high school and all of that fun stuff. So Alaska has been home for me for 40 years this year. I'm 43 years old. I'm going to be 44 soon. And Alaska is been home for almost all of that. And it is a place that I don't have any other experience or knowledge of what it's like to grow up anywhere else. This is what I've known. But there are some unique things, and again, I made a list in my phone about growing up in Alaska that I think may be a little bit different than where many of you would have grown up. Now, one of the things I do want to say is, remember, Alaska is gigantic. And so my experience of growing up in Alaska is specific to my experience in Trapper Creek and Anchorage. People who grew up in other parts of our state would have had a very different experience. But this is my experience. And the first experience is that my heroes growing up were very different. So I know growing up, many people talked about, the Magic Johnson, the Michael Jordan, the Larry Birds, even before that, like NFL stars. And I certainly knew who those people were. My dad has always been a sports fan, so I grew up in a sports home. But those weren't the primary heroes that I had. The heroes that I had as a kid were Iditarod mushers. And one of the things that actually led to this video, or me thinking about this originally as a podcast, was when we took Sherri's cousin Abby out on the dog sled ride recently. I was talking to one of the mushers out there, and you could tell that they're used to people maybe not having a lot of experience or knowledge about that world. But the lodge my parents owned used to have a dog sled race, the Cache Creek Classic it was called. We had a dog team that we had as a family. And so that's just a world I grew up in. And my idols, my heroes, were people who ran and finished the Iditarod. In fact, I remember being a little kid, and I'm so curious because I know my mom's watching this, so I want to know how much of this she remembers. For me, when I would get match cars, like the Matchbox cars, I would put them in lines, and those would be Iditarod mushers on a trail. They weren't NASCAR drivers. They weren't in a car race. I turned everything into a dog sled. Like that was the world that I was around, and those were the heroes. I grew up idolizing people like Libby Riddles and Susan Butcher and Rick Swenson and like all of these Iditarod mushers, these names that in Alaska are famous, but most people around the world have never heard of. Another one of my heroes growing up was a skier by the name of Tommy Moe. Many of you probably don't even know that name. Tommy was a kid here from Alaska who won gold medal in the Olympics, and it was such a big deal here that my mom, thank you. When Tommy came back from the Olympics, they had like a huge welcome home celebration at the Sullivan Arena, which is like our big sports arena. And it was during the day, and my mom let me skip school so that I could go to the Tommy Moe gold medal celebration. And even as a 43-year-old man, I still remember that so vividly. Like, those were the people that were heroes. And I think that one of the reasons that is that as Alaskans, I think our primary identity first is Alaskans, not even Americans. Like when Sherri and I travel internationally, we always say, oh, we're from Alaska, because we get treated way different than if we say we're from America. And I just feel like there's this common bond among Alaskans. So when one Alaskan celebrates or wins or does something amazing, there is this communal celebration, like we all did it. I mean, like, the reality is Tommy Moe did it, not all of Alaskans, but all of us felt a little bit of gold medal pride when he did. And I just remember, like, those were my heroes growing up. It wasn't the people that most people idolized. So that was unique about growing up here. The other thing, y'all, 4th of July fireworks. And you might be saying, yeah, what about them? Summer in Alaska is when the sun almost never sets. And so it is light pretty much around the clock. You know what makes for fireworks being very lackluster? Light. And so I have grown up with 4th of July fireworks, meh. It's like super not impressed with them. In fact, our big fireworks here are New Year's Eve or Ferrandi, our winter carnival that just happened. So I grew up with winter fireworks, not 4th of July fireworks. In fact, I don't think in my entire life, I'm 43 years old, I don't think I have ever seen a proper 4th of July fireworks show. Isn't that crazy? It's on my bucket list because growing up, I just 4th of July was about barbecues or camping or fishing or spending time with friends. It wasn't about a fireworks show because fireworks in Alaska just, at least in the summer. The next thing for me, if there are Alaskans watching, you all will relate to this one. I don't care where you're from. Trends getting into Alaska long after everywhere else. You guys, everything that was cool in the 1990s, basically the 1990s didn't get to Alaska till like 2003, 2004. Like we were just so far behind everything else. And so whatever was cool everywhere else was like, it'll get here eventually. Don't worry. We'll eventually get on that train. And so it was just so funny, even like flipping back through yearbook photos for me. You know, I was high school like 94 to 98. And so if you look at 94 to 98 in Anchorage, you would think it was like 88 to 91. Because that's sort of where, you know what I mean, like things took, or like the early 90s through. So trends just didn't get to Alaska ever, or very, very late if they did. The next thing, and this was really interesting for me, our focus on solstice, both summer solstice and winter solstice. Now, some of you may have heard of solstice, but you might not even know what that is. Summer solstice is the longest day of the year. Winter solstice, shortest day of the year. In Alaska, those are big days, because we experience such dramatic swings from summer and winter, from light and dark. And so in the summertime, we celebrate the heck out of summer solstice, longest day of the year, in the land of the midnight sun. In the winter, we celebrate winter solstice because it's the shortest day of the year, and that means that starting tomorrow, the light is coming back. that we have made it through the worst, and now it's going to be getting even seconds a day better. And so I just grew up with every summer solstice, every winter solstice being celebrated with festivals and events and games and carnivals and concerts and just like all of that. And I remember since I've been married to Sherri, we were traveling somewhere, and I don't remember if it was a summer or winter solstice. But wherever we were, I asked her, I was like, oh, are there any solstice festivals going around or going on? And I remember her look at me, and she was like, you Alaskan. Like the rest of us, we don't take solstice as seriously as all of you do. So for me, growing up, solstice was such a big deal. And it's weird to think that there are some places that don't even pay attention to it. How strange. Next thing on my list, this one, concerts. You guys, Alaska is getting better at this slightly. We are not anywhere close to another major city when it comes to like touring. Alaska is difficult to get to. It's expensive to get to. And so major concert tours or show tours are not something I ever grew up with. In fact, I would say almost all of the big concerts I've seen, we've flown to. In fact, when you hear somebody talk about like, oh, I'm going to this concert, it's like, oh, where are you flying? Like, we get some concerts and stuff here, but nothing like most cities. In fact, growing up, I remember, now the state fair is getting better. I did buy tickets for our state fair this year for Ludacris, because when you look at me, you probably think that man is a Ludacris fan. You're correct. But growing up, I remember the state fair concerts were always like bands that my parents would have loved, or maybe my parents' parents would have loved. We got the concerts here. It's like there's a band in their prime, and then they pass their prime, and then whatever that season is after they've passed their prime, that's normally when we would get them. Now again, it is changing some, but growing up, I remember very, very few concerts. In fact, I remember going to a Green Day and Lit concert here in Anchorage and thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is here. Like, it was such a big deal that those guys came to Anchorage. So going to concerts was just not a thing we grew up with. We would have to fly to Seattle or fly to Portland or fly somewhere to see any major tour. Gosh. Okay, next one. This one is still true to this day. I am amazed by palm trees. And that probably sounds so dumb to so many of you who live in places where you look out your window and you see palm trees. Y'all, we have pine trees. We don't have palm trees. And I don't know if I could tell you the first time I saw a palm tree. It must have been, oh gosh, teenage years for sure. I can't remember when I would have seen a palm tree growing up. Born in Connecticut, lived in Oregon a little bit. Family moved to Alaska. We went back to Connecticut, but there's no palm trees in Connecticut. And so to me, palm trees were, if you would have asked me, give me a description of tropical, I would have said palm trees. Not beach, not water, because we have water here. But there's something about palm trees. And I actually found myself doing this a lot in Fiji. I would just sit outside and there's the ocean like right in front of me, this beautiful ocean view. And I wouldn't be looking at the ocean, I'd be looking up at the palm trees. Because to me, they just symbolized a different place in the world. They symbolized tropical. They symbolized, does that make sense at all? Or do I just sound like an absolute crazy person to many of you in this video? I grew up with glaciers and rivers and lakes and bears and moose being normal. Palm trees, terribly exotic. Like, the most exotic thing. That sounds strange to say. The next one, distance being distorted. So, I talked earlier about Alaska being huge. Alaska's gigantic. And so to me, when I hear people in, just so you know, we refer to most of y'all as the lower 48. That's what we call the rest of the United States minus Hawaii. Alaska and Hawaii have a unique bond. Like, we're kind of like, we're in this together. But the rest of y'all, we call you the lower 48. And so I hear friends who live in the lower 48, they're like, it's 45 minutes away. Like, oh my God, it's an hour away. A couple hours away. But Alaska is so big that driving that distance is, at least where I live on the road system, growing up, it was nothing. I remember when Sherri and I think maybe before we were married or early in our marriage, before Dairy Queen came to Anchorage, there was a Dairy Queen in the town of Soldotna, which is like 2-ish hours south of us. And if it was a beautiful sunny summer day and you just wanted to be out and driving, we'd be like, want to go get a Blizzard? And we'd literally drive 2 hours to go get a Blizzard. Now, granted, the Blizzard was just an excuse to get out on the roads of Alaska, but we would spend 4 hours on the road for an ice cream because it just doesn't matter. We've driven to the town of Seward, which is also like 2 hours, and just had lunch and come back. I feel like the distance in Alaska is very distorted. There are a lot of places, if you drove 2 hours, you might be a couple states away. Here, you're the next town away. It's so different. And then the final one, and this was really funny growing up, it's that restaurants, national chain restaurants specifically, were a huge novelty. Now, I talked about like Dairy Queen, but there were many that we didn't have in Alaska. In fact, when Sherri moved here, we didn't have Olive Garden here in Anchorage. And so growing up, we had TV, obviously, and so we would see all of these Olive Garden commercials or all of these commercials for other restaurants, but we didn't have them here. And so when Alaskans traveled, and still, this is still true much today, you didn't find like, oh, what's the cool local place? It's like, nope, I'm going to Olive Garden because I've been watching their commercials every single day and I can finally have it. And so when Alaskans traveled, we largely would visit chain restaurants that we didn't have here. It's so funny. Like, you guys know our love for Chick-fil-A, so when we travel, still to this day, we visit Chick-fil-A on most of our trips, if there's one close. But back in the day, it used to be so different. In fact, now that Alaska has gotten more of those kinds of restaurants, it has definitely changed where we eat when we travel, because now we are looking for just kind of like better, cooler local places. But man, I remember growing up, so many people, it's like, oh my God, you're going to Seattle? Tell me where you're going to eat. And it was never like, oh, here's these cool local places. It was always like, okay, well, we're going to Olive Garden, and then we're going to go to Texas Roadhouse, and then we're going to go to, and it was just like, oh, that sounds like a dream. Because, again, we grew up with all of the commercials, all of the marketing, all of the advertising, none of the ability to have them. And so traveling was always lame chain restaurants. Not lame. I still love me an Olive Garden soup, salad, and breadstick to this day. But anyway, that's all that was on my list. And I do have to say this. Alaska is one of those places that I would not have wanted to grow up anywhere else. I feel like it has impacted my view of the world. I feel like it has impacted my view of creation, my view of nature, my view of adventure. I loved growing up as a little kid and then even getting older into Alaska. And there's this thing that happens, and it's happened with almost all of my friends, where sometime around high school, when you start thinking about college, there starts to be this conversation, and it's happened again with like almost all of my friends, about, I can't wait to get out. I can't wait to get out. And so many of my friends left Alaska to go to college with the intent of never coming back except maybe to visit. And they're gone for a few years. Maybe they graduate, maybe they start a family somewhere else, maybe they get a first job somewhere else. But I will say the majority of them, eventually time drifts them back home. It's one of those places that I really do believe, and it sounds cliche, I think it gets in your blood. I don't think there's any getting rid of Alaska. I don't think there's any moving past Alaska. You can build a life somewhere else, but I think there's always a piece of Alaska that will stay with you. It's just a wonderful place. I love the fact that I've gotten to call Alaska home for 40 years of my life. It is a conversation starter no matter where I go. Anywhere we've traveled in the world, from Ireland to Fiji to Paris, to tropical islands on cruises, when I tell people we're from Alaska, the questions just start. They want to know all about it. And I love that. I love living in a place that evokes wonder from people. It's a cool place to call home. Sherri and I say all the time that we feel like we live in a postcard. And I think that describes it pretty well. And so I just wanted to take some time and just share some of the quirks about living here, or not living here now, but growing up here, because much of this stuff has changed. Again, y'all, we got Ludacris at our state fair. Sherri will not be going with me. In fact, I wish you could have seen her face when I was like, hey, Ludacris is coming to state fair. And just like blank expression. I was like, do you want to go? It's like, nope. So I'm going with friends, not with Sherri, to see Ludacris. So clearly, you guys, we're really growing as a state. But let me know if you have any questions down below. I would love to answer them about Alaska. But also, if any of you grew up here or lived here, did anything that I shared like connect with you? Was there anything that was like, oh my God, that was my upbringing as well? Because I really want to know. So a very different LeggLife video. Again, my initial thought was that this would be a podcast, but I think this actually worked out better. So thank you so much for letting me ramble on about this beautiful place that we get to call home. I may have never gotten to see 4th of July fireworks. I may have not seen a palm tree until I was probably in my teens. But man, what a magical place to get to grow up. So I'm very, very, very thankful. Friends, I love you all so much. We'll see you on the next LeggLife video.